Hello, everybody. Bonjour, salut, and welcome to another French GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. So in this particular video tutorial, we're going to look at pronouns. Again, a potentially complex or difficult aspect of French GCSE or iGCSE grammar, which many students can struggle with. So I will try and break this down into as simple terms as possible and clarify any doubts that you may have. So, first of all, my name's Dhananjay Talwar, and I studied French and Italian for my MA at the University of Cambridge. I graduated in 2015, and I've been in the field of education since that time. I've learnt more than 20 languages myself to different levels, and at least 9 of those to fluency. So, it is something that I'm really passionate about, of course, and a real hobby of mine as well. And I love motivating my students likewise and helping them to achieve their language learning goals and get to their target grades. And I've done this already with over 500 students who I've helped to achieve or exceed their target grade in French GCSE or iGCSE as a full-time tutor. And I have taught other languages as well, about 8 of them so far to GCSE and iGCSE level, and some at higher levels too. So let's get into the subject of this video then. But first, a quick look at the French GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. So as of August 2025, there are 4 exam boards for GCSE French and 2 for iGCSE French. You should recognize your exam board if you're a student. And yeah, this video, however, will be relevant for students of all exam boards because we're looking again at French grammar, which will be relevant no matter what exam board you are studying. So let's start off by looking at the definition of a pronoun. So there are actually many different types of pronouns, but we're going to focus on 2 quite commonly difficult and confusing kinds of pronouns. A pronoun itself, though, is a small word that replaces a noun. Usually it's a small word, just a few letters in English or even in French. But it's the function of a pronoun that is the most important to know and be aware of. A pronoun stands in for a noun. So, for example, in English, we could say Dan was tired, Dan didn't want to do his homework, but the vast majority of people would not say that because it's very repetitive. Instead, what they would say is Dan was tired, he didn't want to do his homework. And it functions exactly the same in French. So he, which is underlined there, is actually the pronoun. And you can see that in that second sentence, it replaces Dan, which is a noun. And that's what tells us that it is a pronoun because it stands in for or replaces a noun. That's what every single pronoun does in some way, shape, or form, though there are many different kinds of pronouns. And speaking of the different types of pronouns, there are actually many of these in French. Many students may not be fully aware of that, but there are various different types of pronouns, and all of these are potentially ones that you could come across in some way for French GCSE or iGCSE. The good thing is, though, that some are definitely more important than others, and you may not think of them necessarily in this way, specifically as pronouns. You may simply learn the words themselves without thinking of them specifically as pronouns, and that's also okay. So the kinds of pronouns include subject pronouns, direct object pronouns, indirect object pronouns, reflexive pronouns, which are used only with reflexive verbs, stressed pronouns to show emphasis effectively, relative pronouns, interrogative pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, and possessive pronouns. So quite a complete list. Yeah, many students will come across these words somehow for GCSE and iGCSE. But in this particular video, we're looking at the most commonly difficult pronouns and what students will generally think of when they come across the term pronouns, which are direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns. And I'm going to tell you how to differentiate between them, how you can use them, what these are in French, and what their functions are. Okay, so before we delve into direct object and indirect object pronouns, it's very, very useful or essential to know what a subject and an object is. So, subject and object, those are quite common everyday words in any case. But here we're talking, of course, about subject and object in terms of grammar, in grammatical terms only. So, in grammar, the subject of a sentence means the person or thing that is doing the action. The object, on the other hand, of a sentence is the person or thing that is receiving the action. And in English, like in French, most sentences or typical sentences will contain a subject and an object, although that does not necessarily have to be the case. Um, Sentences in English and in French actually typically follow the same word order, where the subject comes first, followed by the verb, which is the doing word or action word, and then the object. And one typical example of that is the dog bites the man. In that sentence, you can clearly see that the subject is the dog because the dog is the one doing the action. The dog is the one doing the biting. And the object, therefore, is the man because the man is receiving the action. The action or the biting is being done to the man. So these are important concepts to clarify before we talk about direct object and indirect object pronouns. Likewise, you will need to know about what direct and indirect objects are before we look at the pronouns that can stand in for and replace both of these. So, in grammar, now we're zooming in and we're only really looking at objects in terms of grammar, which means the person or thing that is receiving the action or that the action of the sentence is done to. And in grammar, there are two different kinds of objects. So the first type is called a direct object. And this means a person or thing that directly receives the action of the verb. And these will not have, either in English or in French, they would not have a preposition in front of them. For example, if you to say in French, je mange une pomme, meaning I eat an apple, une pomme is a direct object. Because une pomme or an apple, that's the thing that's directly being eaten. It's the recipient of the action of the verb. And you can see that it doesn't come after a preposition either. Indirect objects, so that's the second type of an object. And an indirect object, on the other hand, refers to a person or thing that indirectly receives the action of the verb. And this would normally come after a preposition. For instance, you could say in French, je parle à mon ami, I speak to my friend. Mon ami is an indirect object. The easiest way we can tell that is because it comes after a preposition. In this case, the preposition à. And you can see that in English, it's very similar. My friend would be an indirect object in the same sentence. And we can see that because it comes after the preposition to. If there wasn't any preposition there in either the English or the French, then that would indicate that it's a direct object rather than an indirect object. So the presence of a preposition just in front of the object tells us really that it's an indirect object the majority of the time in English and French. Okay, so it's important to understand these concepts clearly before we go on to the pronouns themselves. So we will do that now, starting with direct object pronouns. A direct object pronoun, you can probably work out, is therefore a pronoun which replaces a direct object. So in French, these include le, which replaces a direct object that is masculine singular. For example, je vois mon père, I see my dad. You could replace the direct object there, which is mon père, with le to make je le vois, meaning I see him. So mon père, my dad, that is the masculine singular direct object, and therefore it can be replaced by le. Le, which is a pronoun, these direct object pronouns, and even the indirect object pronouns too, they come slightly further forward in the sentence. Typically, they go just in front of the verb, as you can see here in je le vois, instead of je vois le, which would be incorrect, yeah. Le can be shortened to just an L apostrophe before a word beginning with a vowel or vowel sound. The next direct object pronoun is la. That replaces a direct object that is specifically feminine singular. For example, if you're to say je vois ma mère, I see my mother, you could say je la vois, I see her. So la is shortened to L apostrophe before a word that starts with a vowel sound as well. But yeah, understanding how la is used as a direct object is important. Ma mère, my mother, is of course um, a feminine singular direct object, and therefore it can be replaced with la, and la comes slightly further forward in the sentence, just in front of the verb. And the last direct object pronoun is li. Li replaces a direct object that is plural, regardless of gender, regardless of whether it's masculine or feminine. For example, you could say je vois mes parents, meaning I see my parents. If you replace the direct object there, mes parents, with a pronoun, that would become je les vois, I see them. Mes parents is, of course, plural. It's a direct object, but it's a plural direct object, and therefore can be replaced by the word or the direct object pronoun les instead, which again goes just ahead of the verb. Okay, now we go on to indirect object pronouns. These are even slightly more limited in French, as in there are even fewer of them. So an indirect object pronoun, of course, is a pronoun which replaces an indirect object in a sentence. And in French, these are lui. Lui is the first indirect object pronoun, and that replaces any indirect object that is singular. So lui would translate into English as to him or to her, or potentially even to it. For example, je parle à mon ami, meaning I speak to my friend. We could replace à mon ami. Mon ami is the indirect object, and we can tell that because more clearly because it comes after a preposition. It comes specifically after the preposition à in French. And if we were to replace all of that à mon ami, all of that indirect object, we could replace it with lui. So it would become je lui parle, I speak to him or to her. We would replace it with lui because mon ami, my friend, is singular. So it's a singular indirect object and therefore can be replaced by the indirect object pronoun lui, which again, just like the direct object pronouns, these indirect object pronouns come just in front of the verb usually. And the second and final indirect object pronoun is leur. Leur replaces an indirect object, which is plural. So gender doesn't come into it or make a difference at all in terms of the indirect object pronouns. What is important is whether they're replacing a singular indirect object or a plural indirect object. And for that reason, there's fewer indirect object pronouns than direct object pronouns, which may be slightly easier. So leur is used to replace an indirect object which is plural. For example, in the sentence je parle à mes amis, meaning I speak to my friends, here you're speaking to more than one person, à mes amis. And again, mes amis or my friends, that isn't the indirect object. It's the indirect object, and we can see that because it comes after a preposition, à. So if we were to replace that with a pronoun, we'd use the pronoun or indirect object pronoun leur, and that would become je leur parle, meaning I speak to them. So leur effectively means to them. Again, leur comes just in front of the verb as well. Okay, so you may well need to go back over those slides and that information a few times. It can be difficult for students to take in and understand. And certainly, this is one of those topics that usually requires plenty of practice. But it does get actually more complex. Although the good thing is that the next few rules that we're about to cover, they're not extremely common and they're not something that you're going to see very often at all. So the first one of those is the preceding direct object pronoun rule. So this refers to when there is a direct object pronoun, only a direct object pronoun specifically. So that would be either le, la, L apostrophe, or les, and one of those that goes before or precedes a past participle. going before a preceding, that's means the same thing effectively. So whenever there is a direct object pronoun that comes before a past participle, the rule in French is the past participle has to agree with the direct object pronoun, and they have to agree in terms of number, singular and plural, and gender, masculine or feminine. So I will give some examples of this. So if the direct object pronoun, which comes in front of the past participle or precedes the past participle, is feminine, you must add e to the end of the past participle. If the direct object pronoun is plural, you must add an s to the end of the past participle. And if the direct object pronoun is both feminine and plural, you have to add es to the end of the past participle. Here are some examples. J'ai vu la femme, I saw the woman. If you then wanted to say I saw her, in French, that would be je l'ai vue. Vue has an E at the end, on the end of the past participle, to show that it agrees with L apostrophe. And yeah, we can see that it agrees with L apostrophe. Yeah, L apostrophe is replacing la femme, the woman, which is feminine singular. And that's the reason why you have to stick an extra E onto the end of the past participle vu. J'ai vu les filles, I saw the girls. The girls, of course, is feminine plural. So that if you were to replace les filles with a pronoun, that becomes je les ai vues, I saw them. Vu, you can see the past participle again has an extra E and an extra S at the end to indicate that it agrees with les, because les is a direct object pronoun that stands in for or replaces something that's feminine plural, les filles. Okay, so that's how this works. It actually functions exactly the same way with direct objects in general. So if there's a preceding direct object in French, a direct object in French that comes before a past participle, even if it's not a direct object pronoun, just a direct object itself, the same rule occurs. The good news is if you're staring at this and thinking, this sounds quite hard, it's quite complicated, the good thing is that it's quite rare. So you're not going to come across this very often at all. You should, ideally, if you're writing in French, potentially if you're speaking as well, although the pronunciation is not necessarily altered by these extra rules, you should try and remember this, definitely. But yeah, it is something which is quite advanced for GCSE level. And it only happens, this only occurs in a very specific situation as well, when there's a preceding direct object or preceding direct object pronoun in front of a past participle. Okay, now on to combining pronouns. Again, this is quite complex. It's something that students do or sometimes do learn for GCSE and iGCSE, but it's one of the harder aspects of French grammar. And can definitely take some time to get your head around. Combining pronouns refers to when you have two different kinds of pronouns within the same sentence. So when there is a direct object pronoun and an indirect object pronoun within the same sentence, they must follow a specific order in French. And that is that the direct object pronoun always comes first. So if you have both of them, a direct object pronoun and an indirect object pronoun, in the same sentence, you always put the direct object pronoun first and then the indirect object pronoun after that. For example, if we were to say, I gave the present to my parents, which in French is j'ai donné le cadeau à mes parents. You could say, I gave it to them. So if we were to replace those objects, which are underlined in the sentence above, le cadeau, which is the present, that is a direct object, and it's masculine singular, so that would become le. And à mes parents, that's an indirect object. We can tell that because it comes after a preposition à, and that is plural, to my parents. So it would be replaced by the plural indirect object pronoun, which is leur. So if you put them together with le and leur, it becomes, using the pronouns instead of the original objects, it would become je le leur ai donné. And the important thing, of course, is to note that the direct object pronoun here, which is le, comes first, and then the indirect object pronoun, which is leur, comes just after that. And they must follow that order. In fact, combining pronouns in general in French can be pretty tricky, to say the least. You can have multiple pronouns within a French sentence, although generally you would not see more than two, or perhaps you would not see more than two, or perhaps maximum three pronouns within one sentence in French. But there is a specific order that they have to follow when you do have more than one pronoun in the same French sentence. And there are tables like this which illustrate clearly what that order is. So the good thing is, again, that this is very advanced for GCSE. Some students will come across tables like this. Yeah, and if by any chance when you're writing or speaking, you do chuck in two pronouns in the same sentence, you should be aware of the correct order. But certainly you can get away with not knowing this for GCSE or iGCSE. Yeah, this is not essential knowledge for all students. But if you do happen to combine pronouns, then this is the specific order that they must go in French. So first would be the reflexive pronoun me, te, ce, nous or vous. After that, if there is one, you would put a direct object pronoun le or la or les. After that would come the indirect object pronoun if there is one, so either lui or leur. After that would be I if it's there, and after that would come on. I and on themselves are quite advanced, and many GCSE, iGCSE students would likely not come across them as yet. Okay, this is just one example to illustrate the very specific rules regarding the position of pronouns when they're combined in a sentence in French. Il y en a beaucoup, meaning there are many of them. There's two pronouns in that sentence, I and on, and you can see that they follow the columns of the table in terms of their positioning. I comes first, because it's in the fourth column here, and then on comes just after that. As you can see, I comes before on in the table, and that's why they're in that order in the sentence as well. Okay, now just a brief quiz to check this quite tricky topic of French grammar, which is pronouns. So, first of all, what is the definition of a pronoun? I mentioned this right towards the start of the video, so I'll give you a little bit of time to think over it and then show the answer. Okay, so the answer is a pronoun is a word which replaces a noun in a sentence. That is, simply the definition of a pronoun. Question 2 is true or false. So a direct object comes after a preposition. Is that true or is it false? Let me give you a bit of time to think before showing you the answer. Okay, time for the answer now. So this one is false. Indirect objects come after a preposition rather than direct objects. And usually that's a good way to identify whether it is an indirect object or not. If it comes after a preposition, it should be an indirect object as opposed to a direct object. Question 3 is also true or false. If a direct object or a direct object pronoun comes in front of a past participle in a French sentence, the past participle has to agree with the direct object or direct object pronoun in terms of gender and number. Is that true or is it false? Again, I'll give you a bit of time, some seconds to think through things. Okay, let me reveal the answer then. This one's true. So this is called the preceding direct object rule. And this is one of the rules specifically that we looked at earlier in the video. Question 4 then, which comes first when both pronouns are combined together in the same sentence, the direct object pronoun or the indirect object pronoun? Okay, let me reveal the answer then. When both these types of pronouns are in the same sentence, it's the direct object pronoun that comes first, and you have to follow those or obey those strict rules of French syntax or grammar, I suppose. The direct object pronoun would come first, then the indirect object pronoun. Okay, if you have any questions on any of this or for more information about personalized help that I do offer, you can contact me by email, through Facebook, or Instagram. And I do post on Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn every single day about my love for languages, naturally, sharing that with the world and motivating people to learn languages, giving them the methods to do so as well. But I also talk about GCSEs and iGCSEs for French and other languages and how you can maximize your marks and prepare for them as well as possible. So I also have many resources available, including free ones for French GCSE and iGCSE. I run a Facebook group, which is free to join for French GCSE and iGCSE students and parents. I often do masterclasses in there, for example, and I do one-to-one classes, group classes too, courses, and more. So if you'd like to have further information on any of that, just get in touch.